Welcome to Game Savers, everybody, your next-gen gaming podcast for news, reviews, previews, impressions, analyses, and roundtable discussions involving past, present, and future games. My name is Tony Morris, and today I'm joined by my dear co-host.
I'm Wayne Donaldson, and I love video games.
And Megan.
Hi there.
And also Ken.
Hi, all.
All right, excellent. Thank you. So we're coming at you live today from New York, Northern Ireland, in the state of Arizona. So we're really here to celebrate Halloween and all that is spooky this season. So stay tuned for that. All right, so we're here to discuss Halloween on our special Halloween-themed episode. We're halfway through October. We are 3 weeks away from the next-gen consoles as well. But we thought we'd dedicate this episode to all things spooky and horror game related because, well, that seems to be a lot of what we play lately. So why don't we go ahead and start off first? Is anybody doing anything for Halloween this year?
I don't think we can. We have pretty much went into lockdown 2.0, so probably not. Some scary video games, some scary movies, and that'll be about it.
Okay. Anybody else?
Yeah, pretty much the same here. Pretty much we'll be doing the scary video games as much as we can, and as many scary movies. Did start at the start of the month, so we're getting deep into that.
All right. What about you, Megan?
Yeah, every year in October I do a Megan's Halloween Horror Hauntathon where I watch a scary movie or Halloween themed thing every day. And this year we're switching it up with some video games, so pretty much the same. I'm really excited for Little Hope to come out on October 30th. Gonna play that the day of. Cannot wait.
We've got that and the new Amnesia this month as well. Oh my goodness. That is so exciting. So any other family traditions or anything weird you guys like to do on Halloween? I know out there, maybe in Northern Ireland, things are a little bit different, but anything out there?
I have to admit, if there's an equivalent of Scrooge at Halloween, that's me. I've never been overly into Halloween. I'm a bit of a Scrooge Christmas as well. Yeah, but I think I'm going to make the effort this year and sort of maybe decorate the house and, as we say, have that night of spooky movies and stuff and try and make the most of it purely because we're so limited in what we can do. Try and turn it into something positive and try and have a bit of fun with it, you know?
Right. I can speak for Jaren and I. We're so she's not a major horror fan by any means of the word. And a couple days ago, we ended up going to a haunted house attraction here in New York, Frightmare Scream Park. Check it out, anybody, if you're in the state of New York. It's, I think, the best one here by a mile. But she did a haunted hayride for the first time as well. And this thing was like 5 stars. They went all out. Was completely not expecting this just because, like social distancing and stuff like that. People can't really get in your face so much, at least you would think. And but on here, they definitely kind of threw that out the window. But it was great. We spent like 20 or 30 minutes on this thing. And there was, I think, about 10 of us total on this hayride. There was a couple other people. There was a family with their kids. And and this is what made this part absolutely terrifying for me. I'm going off on a tangent here. But at one point during this hayride, these guys had basically broke on there from the woods, and it's pitch black the whole time. You cannot see anything. You're in the middle of this dense forest up there, and these guys jump onto the hayride tractor or trailer, whatever you want to call it, and they take this kid, and they're like, "You're coming with me," and they run off into the woods with this kid. And these 2 children are absolutely terrified that are on there with us, and I'm just kind of like, what is going on? Oh my gosh, was that like legit? And because the mom is like just so shook by it, and the kids are crying. And I'm like, well, this is kind of awkward. Is this like actually a scary hayride at this point? Or did we just like witness a kidnapping? And apparently this kid was a child actor or something that was practicing out of this place. And I thought, oh my gosh, that got me so good because I was not ready for that. But I'm just really glad we did not witness a kidnapping or anything like that on our Halloween trip. So that happened. But
Wow.
Outside of that, so I know we're here to talk about some spooky things and whatnot. Obviously you guys are well into this genre as well. That's why we're here. But was there anything throughout life that had kind of inspired you into horror or pushed you in that direction, or anything that you were a big fan of, whether it be growing up or now?
Probably come on off the back of scary movies, to be honest. Whenever I was a kid, there was a guy that lived 2 houses up from me. And my parents were really, really strict about like sort of R18 movies and that sort of thing. So I used to go to his house and we would watch scary movies like, Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, Halloween, Hellraiser. But then I would go back to my parents and I had to lie about what I watched because they wouldn't be happy. So every Saturday night I'd come back and my parents would be, what did you watch tonight? And it was like, Willow. Every week, Willow, I think off the back of that, that's sort of my roots of an interest in horror,
Did you have any younger siblings you had to like make sure they never saw that stuff, or?
No, I had a big brother and he was a bad influence on me. He would make me watch movies that were, even by my standards, just kind of, no, this is too much. There's an old movie and it really freaked me out when I was a kid called House 2, part of the House series. And I keep meaning to go back and watch it again to see if it really was as scary as I remember. I bailed after 5 minutes. I had to run upstairs and just not watch this movie. Even though the first movie is so corny, it's really, really silly, like people in plastic get-ups and stuff. But that second movie freaked me out. So I need to go back and see that sometime.
What was that called again? House 2?
House 2. Yeah.
Noted.
I think there's a cowboy or something in it. Like, my memories of it are so fleeting. But yeah, I need to go back and check that out.
All right. Megan, Ken, feel free to jump in here as wanted.
I got into horror games because of horror movies. So the same. I've been into, scary stuff since I think high school was when I started like watching scary movies every night. I don't know what happened to me, but I just like got into horror and it was like fascinating to me. And so, yeah, I got into the horror games because of that. My favorite franchise is Scream. I really like the corny, making fun of itself, tongue in cheek, but also the whodunit. I love to figure it out. So, yeah, that's what led me to horror games. I'm actually kind of new to horror games and gaming in general. So this is really exciting for me. Horror games are what got me into actual gaming. That's not just Mario. Up until like 3 years ago, all I played was Mario. And then Cody introduced me to Until Dawn. And I was like, this is life-changing. And so I got into the horror genre. And that's what led to actual like real gaming that's not from the 90s for Megan.
How about that? Oh my gosh. And you guys play a lot of that over there on It's Emerald Moon Adventures, correct?
Uh-huh. Yeah. I needed a segment that was all about horror. Because it's my favorite thing ever. And so we did an entire series, and we're doing a series constant. Once we end one horror game, we're going to start another because I need it. I love it so much.
Oh my gosh. That's great. Awesome. What about you, Ken?
So for me, my sort of introduction into horror in general was when I was quite young. I was that kid. I was scared of everything, pretty much I had to sleep with like a lamp on or, at least the light on in the hall as a kid. And I just got to a point sort of like early teens where I had enough of it. And I started to start facing my fears and start watching horror movies. So my sort of introduction to that was Friday the 13th. And to this day, it's my favorite franchise and will probably always be my favorite franchise. And just watching the horror movies just got me a bit more desensitized to it. And then, as a kid, I've always been playing video games. And it was sort of around that time that's when we started getting stuff like Resident Evil coming on to the PlayStation. And that was sort of my introduction to horror gaming. And once again, Resident Evil is my favorite franchise. And it was sort of that kept bringing me on to new levels of horror. Obviously, with the evolution of horror movies, we've went down a route of it's changed from what it was from the 80s to the early 90s, and it's the same with video games as well. But there's a different evolution that's happening in the games where I think the games have got scarier than what they were previous. But horror movies, I think it's went the other way. They're not as scary as what they are, what they used to be.
That's a really good point. Yeah.
All right. I can say for myself, at least, I was always just a huge fan of H.P. Lovecraft. Those books are incredible. I think I have a big collection where like every single one is in there digitally, and I'll always read those every time I'm on like a flight, hoping Cthulhu doesn't just pop out of the ocean and tear the plane apart or whatever. But that's still with me as well. Stephen King, huge fan of those books. A lot of the movie iterations as well. And yeah, same as you guys, really just kind of evolved me into gaming. I think for me, it really started out probably a little bit later than most, around Resident Evil 4 time, circa 2004. And from then on, I could really play. I think during today's episode, you three are probably going to be the ones discussing the real horror games. And I'm just, a giant scaredy cat. And I'm going to be sitting here talking about like things that aren't even actually scary. But what scares you guys in real life? I'd be curious to know a little bit about that before we dive into the spooky games. I'll start off. I'll say for me, deep water, not a fan of it, never have been. I've swam in every ocean on the earth and have still never been a fan of deep water. I don't like not knowing I don't like not knowing what's beneath me. That to me is absolutely terrifying. I still, when I turn off the lights in a basement, I'll fly up the stairs as quick as I can, like I'm 8 years old. Outside of that, spiders, also number one fear, always will be. Won't even go near those things. So those are top of my list.
It might be an old thing to say on a podcast like this, but one thing I'm totally terrified of is public speaking. I just can't have it.
That is absolute horror.
I go to pieces, absolute pieces. It's one of the things that's good about lockdown is not having to deal with people.
Me personally, it's heights. Heights get me. Always have. I don't know. I have nightmares about falling off bridges. So it's heights. Always has been.
That is fascinating to me because, and I'm sorry about divulging too much info here, but you work pretty close to the Grand Canyon, right?
Yeah, I do. I see the Grand Canyon every day. And so that honestly has helped me kind of fight that fear a little bit. I'm definitely a lot better than I was before. So living here has helped. But yeah, it's heights for me. So every time I see somebody get close to the edge, I'm just like, ugh. Like I go weak in the knees, even though it's not me. I almost pass out watching people. It's yeah.
With heights, can you do roller coasters?
Oh yeah. I'm weird because I love roller coasters. They're like one of my favorite things in the world. But like the free falling, that gets me. But also I want to skydive. So I don't know. It's
conflicting.
Yeah, it is. See, I like to push that limit for myself though. I really do. If it's at least in a safe environment. So bungee jumping, I've done that. Skydiving, it's on the list, but like the potential to free fall with nothing to catch you just like makes me weak in the knees.
As is life.
Yeah.
I'd say for my fear, it's being alone, but in the sense of waking up alone. So like things like in like 28 Days Later, that Cillian Murphy waking up in the hospital, nobody around, like that is like that's my ultimate fear. The wake up in the morning and just absolutely no one be there.
Oh my God, that sounds like
what the hell?
That sounds like heaven to me. Like that is my utopia.
Wayne aiming for the peace and relaxation over there. That's
just waking up and going, they've all gone. I'd be like Kevin McAllister in Home Alone,
That's funny you say that, Ken, because I don't even think about the isolation aspect sometimes, but I think of like what you just said in 28 Days Later, which we just watched again the other day, and I'll probably watch that every single year for the rest of my life.
Brilliant.
Right. And I think of other ones that do that same kind of introduction. Maybe it's inspired by the movie or just that general concept. The Walking Dead TV series, I believe season 1 kicks off that way, does it not? Where Rick Grimes wakes up in a hospital and is just Yep. So, and I'm sure there's others out there who do that. But yeah, I always forget about that, the sense of isolation and just the pure thought of it. Wow. So maybe we can blow this conversation wide open from here because we have a lot of ground to cover and there are a lot of spooky games out there. Just so the people are aware. So some of us haven't played the games that others have played. And while we're talking about these on the pod, you might hear one of us dip out of the conversation, either because we're scared or because we don't want the spoilers for ourselves. So if you hear one of us disappear throughout this occasionally on and off, that's why. But without further ado, does anybody want to kick this off? Maybe we just fire away with the Resident Evil series first, because that's just such a monster series in itself. And we'll go from there.
Yeah. I mean, Definitely Resident Evil, absolutely seminal when it comes to video games, horror video games. There was actually one series that kind of predated it and had a huge influence on Resident Evil, and that's Alone in the Dark. Did anyone play those old games?
Ooh, I'm aware of it, but I have not played it.
There's 3 games from 92 through to 94. Even the controls, if you went back and played them now, you'd realize the way it controls and those sort of camera angles and stuff, it sets everything up for Resident Evil. The thing is, those games were absolutely awful. I mean, I played them about 5 years after they launched, and even then, they were so dated. The pace at which you walk is just, it's excruciating to play. Now, it's almost good to go back and have watch a YouTube video or have a go at those games, almost as like an educational thing to kind of, give you the idea of where these games come from and how they evolved. But Resident Evil took what was set up in Alone in the Dark and made what is, to my mind, one of the best horror games of all time, and that is the original Resident Evil. Absolutely outstanding game. And I mean, there's a lot wrong with it, but everything that you shouldn't like about it just makes it even more likable. There's full motion video intros at the very first game. Now this is the original, not the GameCube remake. They're so badly done. The acting's awful, but then they came out and evolved into memes. The Jill Sandwich thing, the Master of Lock Picking. It's impossible to have an interest in horror video games and not have a lot of love for where the Resident Evil series kicked off.
What was it like the first time you played that game? Were you just a wee hobbit running around out there, or?
It was terrifying. I think it was, we were talking about movies there to start with, and I think the big difference moving from movies into video games was when you watch a movie, you get to sit there and watch the protagonist, and they get up off their bed and walk down the corridor or whatever, and you just have to sit there and watch it play out. Moving into Resident Evil for me really was the first time where I had to get up. And I had to look at that corridor, listen for those groans of the zombies at the end.
Ugh.
And then I had to push forward on the controller and make my character walk towards that threat. And it is honestly terrifying. If you get locked into the groove and the atmosphere of the game, it's like no movie. No movie can touch the way a good scary game can make you feel.
Especially at that time, if I recall, just the turning of that first zombie where it just kind of gave you that awkward side eye in the very beginning. It was half red, half white, kind of awkward looking, but absolutely terrifying as a child. As an adult, I'd probably just laugh at it. But at the time, that was pure terror.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Can't forget the dogs jumping out of the window, too. I think that sequence to this day still gets me literally every single time I've got my guard down and I'm going through that hallway. And those dogs come crashing through the window.
Ken, do you remember playing the first Resident Evil for the first time?
So for me, the first Resident Evil game I actually ever played was Resident Evil 2, but it was actually the demo. It was the 30-minute demo where you got the disc. It was the entire game, but it was locked to 30 minutes. So depending on how good you were as a gamer, which at that time I never really was, still not great of a gamer, so I wouldn't have been able to get that far. But to me, that was my sort of introduction to Resident Evil, and I would have been maybe 11 or 12 at the time, and it just completely terrified me. Like, this was my introduction to horror in games, and as Wayne said, you get those moments where there's danger coming, but you have to progress forward, and it's that awkwardness of like, I don't want to go. But I do remember the first time I played the first Resident Evil was not long after I finished Resident Evil 2, because obviously I seen that it was a Resident Evil 2 and I was like, oh right, so obviously there's a first one, so I went back and played that. And the thing that still haunts me to this day, that first zombie, the member of the Bravo team who he's currently eating, is called Kenneth.
Right now,
you guys share a name. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, always stuck with me because that's, it's just like, oh, there was part of me that was just like, wait, is this like in Metal Gear where they know like details about you off your PlayStation? but it wasn't the case. But I was young and impressionable.
It's never a good thing to see your name as a zombie lunch pack or anything, right?
No, never. But like I remember, it just. it was the intensity of those moments where like you had the dogs jumping out. And the thing that I love about the Resident Evil series, especially the remake of Resident Evil, is they knew that moment was so iconic that they changed it for a different point in the game. And I love that, like those sort of attention to details in the games. But it's those moments where you don't want to go and open a door, but you have to. And I love that about the games.
There was that thing where they took certain scary bits out of it and moved it to somewhere else. But
Yeah.
what actually made that scary as well was the fact that as you're walking down a certain corridor and you've played the original, you're thinking, oh God, oh God, oh God, this is the bit where such and such jumps out. And you keep walking and you keep walking and the tension rises and rises and then nothing, and that's nothing happening in these games can often be as scary as something happening. I think that's one of the most interesting things about horror. I always found that the movies and the games where you don't see the threat, where you don't see the enemy, those are way, way scarier than the ones where it's just presented to you right at the start. I mean, if you look back to movies like the original Alien movie, you don't get the reveal. Predator as well, you don't get the reveal until the end of the movie because it's the unknown is way scarier than any monster or demon that can throw at you.
I can't wait to talk about that game here in a few minutes. I know, Megan, you're excited about that. Resident Evil 2, did anybody go through that? I still recall, and going through the remake that came out here recently a couple of years ago, that still absolutely sends shivers down my spine.
Yeah.
100%.
Go ahead, Ken. Okay. Resident Evil 2 almost flips on the head what I just said because the tyrant was presented pretty early in the game. But it's that threat of, is he going to be here? Is he not going to be here? That building of tension using that character again.
You call him the tyrant. I find that strange. Do you know him as Mr. X as well?
Mr. X. I didn't want to say Nemesis because I know that Nemesis is Resident Evil 3. And
X gonna give it to you. What?
But they are tyrants, aren't they? They're sort of, yeah. All the Resident Evil games, fantastic. Absolutely love them.
How about Resident Evil 3 and 4? I know though that's kind of where the cutoff is for when things start to get really wild in the Resident Evil series, and probably the biggest gap you're going to see out of any franchise out there.
Yeah, I find with Resident Evil 3, I still find that there was that element of the scare tactic in the fact that pretty much from the get-go, there's this huge thing after you called Nemesis, and it's going to be tracking you down pretty much no matter where you go. And there was always that element of, you get to a certain part of the game and you're like, right, I know I have to go here to then go back, but I know I'm going to get jumped at some point. And there was just always that fear in the back of your mind of when it was going to happen. I did love the addition that they brought to it of the scenario choosing of whether you choose to fight Nemesis or you choose to flee. It puts you at sort of like a hot seat moment of panic of, oh, what do I do? And you're sitting there like, oh, I've only got a few seconds. Quick, right, just do that one and then go. Resident Evil 4, as a fan of Resident Evil, I'm more than happy to say that, yes, there was a point where it started dropping off. Resident Evil 4 to me is still a phenomenal game. Survival horror, to a certain extent, yes. I like the fact that what they were able to do with that game, especially on the hardware of the GameCube at the time, it was just phenomenal. And then obviously with the remake of Resident Evil, and then Resident Evil 0, it did bring a new light to it. I think when you get into sort of 5 and 6 territory, it was sort of dropping off a bit, and it was definitely going down the horror route, which, once again, I still enjoy playing the games. There always is that element of, especially like in Resident Evil 6, the Leon campaign, there was still always those elements of, what's behind that corner, what's going to jump out at me. But then obviously with Resident Evil 7, it brought the horror back, and it's one of the top, it's definitely in the top 3 or within that conversation at least.
Yeah, absolutely. I know Resident Evil 4 for me still jumps out with 7. Those two I think are my standouts from the series of all. But in number 4, when you start off in the beginning as Leon and you've got that over the shoulder third person view for the first time, and it's kind of in broad daylight, this horror is happening, which is a new concept at the time. And you're in, I think it's Spain or something like that. And you're dealing with Las Plagas, so you don't know it yet. But these people are basically sick and infected villagers, and you don't know if they're zombies, you don't know if they're humans, you don't know if they're a hybrid of the two. What on earth is going on? And then you come across that village right off the beginning, which is completely different from any other Resident Evil game where you see huge populations of people running around in the game, because that just does not happen. You see a ton of people, you think, okay, maybe this is good. But then you see that security guard that drove you there hanging on a hook in the middle of the village on fire and think, okay, well, this is not good. Let's walk over to that. And sure enough, the entire village goes hay on you, and it's on from there. You know, you've got, obviously, you're hiding at the cabin, you're boarding up doors, windows, you're fighting off the chainsaw dude that shows up out of absolutely nowhere from Texas Chainsaw Massacre with a bag on his head. It's just absolutely terrifying. I still love that sequence to this day. If they ever remaster it, I'm probably going to just replay that sequence 10 times.
Although the question for anyone who's played Resident Evil 4, did you save the dog?
No, sorry, dog. That's can't risk it. I know after being attacked by all these villagers. Yeah, the one in the bear trap.
Yeah.
Yep. Nope. Sorry, doggo. Love dogs, but this dog just it had something about it I could not get past.
I think that era of Resident Evil, say 4, 5, and 6, I find a very odd era for Resident Evil. And I personally speaking, after 1, 2, 3, 0, and Code Veronica, I was 100% up for this franchise to reinvent itself. I honestly didn't want another Resident Evil game using, you know, what they'd done before. I was tired of, you know, 4 keys for 4 doors, and just they all started to feel a wee bit samey. As good as they all were, I just felt they were retreading the same path. And then 4 came along and just absolutely blew me out of the water. It was everything the series needed, as far as I was concerned. 5 came along after that, and it was kind of like similar, but to me, 5 went down an action route. It was much more of an action game than a horror game. And then 6 tried to be all things to all men. It was like 3 different Resident Evil games smooshed into one package, and that really didn't work. Now, I'm going to try and segue this on, because around about then, I was starting to fall out of love with Resident Evil, and another series was starting to come up, and that was Dead Space. Did anyone play the Dead Space games?
Oh, yes, indeed. Yes.
Yeah. Dead Space 1. The first Dead Space to me was, I am okay with Resident Evil doing their action thing, because now I've got this. And I couldn't play, similar, we talked about Doom on one of the other podcasts. I couldn't play Dead Space for more than an hour. I found it so absolutely terrifying and so stressful walking down every corridor and every single encounter with the enemies. I just had to take a break after every hour. It was that intense.
Megan, being the queen of the horror genre, what did you think of Dead Space?
So I actually, I've only played part of it because we were visiting my brother, and he has it, and he knows that I love horror. So he's like, hey, you need to try this out. You need to see what you think. And so I played about an hour or two, and it's incredible. But I moved on to other things and haven't been back to Dead Space. But my goodness, those things are terrifying, and they just drop out of nowhere. Yeah. Oh my goodness!
the way they move.
Yeah. I love horror, but I scream like bloody murder every time anything interacts with me. And so I was screaming like every 10 seconds.
They done something incredibly smart with the gameplay. Like, I don't know about you, but when I freak out during a game, I just start firing, you know, and just shooting in any direction in the hope that you hit
grenades,
something. You know,
throw it.
Murder the thing. The thing's trying to kill me.
Yeah.
But Dead Space forces you to kind of like try and chill while this thing's like spasmodically creeping towards you. So you have to shoot off the arms or shoot off the legs. You have to, you know, aim for specific body parts. So while you're completely freaking out over this absolute nightmare of a creature that's coming towards you, you've got to kind of calm, shoot the arm, shoot the other arm, shoot the leg, and it's just that to me is one of the best, like sort of melding the gameplay and the style of the game into one thing, and the two things complementing each other like perfectly.
I feel like what you were just talking about there with the mechanics of that I think back to Resident Evil 4 again. Sorry to bring that back up, but when you're shooting off the limbs of a creature, and now this wasn't really a thing in Resident Evil besides popping the head off of one of those Las Plagas, but excuse me, having the opportunity to like shoot their limbs and they react to that, like, you know, if you shot one of those walker zombies, infected, whatever you want to call them, in the knee, then it would fall down to its knee, right?
Yeah,
and Dead Space took that a notch further and was like, hey, how about you just cut off its entire arm and it keeps crawling towards you? And that to me was terrifying, is if I shot off its legs and it kept running towards me with those big scissor arms, like, oh my God, what do? It's a bullet sponge now, help. You know,
but then Dead Space took the strangest turn. The third game, they decided to make it a co-op game, and even if you don't play it co-op, you're still with an AI controlled buddy. And I mean, there's Ken touched on it earlier. There's nothing more terrifying than being on your own in a scary situation. So why give you that buddy? To me, that was so counterintuitive against trying to create a horror experience. And I honestly think that's what killed the franchise.
Yeah, speaking of, there's nothing worse than having, one, a partner game, but two, having a bad partner at a horror game, which I think might be a good segue into Left 4 Dead. Did anybody play that? Because that's probably top 10 of all time for franchises.
I played some Left 4 Dead, yeah.
So that game, you know, obviously the concept is four of you are survivors in a zombie horror nightmare situation, and your objective is to get from point A to point B through multiple chapters until you eventually get to a rescue helicopter that takes you out of that campaign. That game to me, and again, you guys are touching on the harder subjects than I am with horror, but that game to me was absolutely terrifying as well. You had things like The Witch, where if you ever encountered that, you know, it was just this lady that was crying and moaning and all this stuff on her own. And then, you know, if you've shown your flashlight anywhere near her, and this entire game is at night, but if you even shown your flashlight near her, she would make a beeline straight for that person, not for the rest of the party, just that idiot. And she would tear them apart in front of everyone else. And you're just sitting there like, oh, okay, well, I don't want none of that. They can take my teammate. Fine, so be it. But that game brought a lot of elements, I think, into what you were talking about with having partners, whether they be good or bad. Mm-hmm. That game really capitalized it. Nothing to me was more terrifying than running out of a safe room that you know is safe, that zombies can't get into, to go save your friend that just got pulled back by a smoker or hit by a tank, whatever it may be. So Left 4 Dead, terrifying.
Yeah. I actually played Observation. Has anyone touched that? I've been playing it over the last few nights. It's an interesting one. It's less popular. It's by a developer called Bloober, who made Layers of Fear and the Blair Witch Project game. It's an interesting concept because you're kind of like a detective that is trying to solve a mystery in a sort of Blade Runner-esque type world. So it's all futuristic. It's all science fiction. And the idea is that everyone has a chip in their brain, and he can hack into the chip sort of to read their memories. But every time you do this, the game's like a detective game, and you're looking around for clues and snooping about and trying to put
this guy the CIA or
story
something?
Elements together. No, he's like a private detective. But then whenever you go into these people's like brain chips to read their memories, it all plays out like a nightmare. And I personally don't find it overly scary. It's more unsettling than anything else, but it's wild trippy. It is so trippy. And for that, I would recommend playing it. It's just really, really creative. Well, one thing I've always thought about with video games is you're given a complete blank slate. You can create absolutely anything you want with a video game. And so many video games are very, very much based in reality. And this is the polar opposite of that. It's just utterly fantastic and crazy. And yeah, definitely give it a go. It's out now on PC, Xbox, PlayStation and stuff, but it's actually getting a remaster next gen. Wow. And it's going to be called Observer System Redux. It's got a few extra chapters and stuff. And another game by those, Layers of Fear, similar sort of game, and that it plays out where you've got a story, and then every now and again you've got this like horror sequence that you've got to work through. And again, it's not, well, there is jump scares, but the scarier parts of it is it kind of plays with your expectations. There's another game that we'll probably talk about later that does this. For example, walking down a corridor and the door at the end's locked. So you've got to turn around. But when you turn around, it's no longer the corridor you walk down. It's now a kitchen or nothing. And there's just something insanely unsettling about that. There's a bit in Resident Evil 7 where it does that, where you walk up and there's a load of mannequins sitting about. And as you move around the room, the mannequins just shift to different positions.
I can't take that.
Although, it's not a big scary monster that's trying to kill you. It's not a mutant spider. It's just screwing with your head. And for me personally, that's horror. That is what really, really terrifies me. That's what really throws me and makes me want to set the controller down and, step into the next room for a breather with the lights on,
So speaking of that, Megan, I know you've been playing a ton of this. Let's talk about Alien Isolation. That game has been absolutely terrifying to play. I know myself, I've forced me to play it because all of you have been playing it. And I've accepted the fact at this point that I'm just basically never going to touch it. And that's how it is, because it's too much for me to handle. So tell us a little bit about that game.
Yeah. So I'm only a little bit. We're playing it on the channel right now, and I think I'm only like 4 or 5 episodes in. So heads up, spoilers ahead. But I recently found the alien and actually just died from it. So it was terrifying. It was like a horrifying sequence because I got through this like big thing where you're running from those like from the android guys. You have to like sneak around them, and I snuck so well. I'm so good at sneaking in games. So I, instead of like fighting them, I just snuck around everything, and then I get out into the open and I'm like, there's the door, all right, I got this. And I go, and all of a sudden I hear that like the screeching, and then I'm down on the ground, and I'm like, what just happened? Like I was so taken aback. I was like, how was it around me? Like there was no warning. There was just screams, and I'm dead. It was, yeah. So I'm not that far into it. I don't think I'm that far into it. But so far it's incredible. It looks amazing. Like graphics are so insane. I transitioned from Amnesia to this, and so this is just next level. And I don't know. I'm obsessed with it. I cannot wait to play more of it.
How far in would you say the alien appears? Like, how long does it just completely leave you there in suspense?
Yeah. So we got to the alien at the end of, I think, episode 3. So it was like 2-3 hours in before it ever even shows up. But then when it does show up, you don't interact with it. You just see it, and it doesn't see you. And it's like, I think I went and I hid in a locker for like 10 minutes because I was like, is he coming back? What's going on? I don't know what's happening. So yeah.
Alien Isolation. Anybody else play that?
Yeah, it's of this generation, it is definitely my favorite horror game. It has everything. It has the suspense. It puts you in those moments of complete panic. It makes you want to run out the room and go, I'm not playing this for the rest of the night. For a game that's 6 years old now, even sticking it in now, it's phenomenal. Like the graphics, everything about the game is just phenomenal, and I think it's just an absolute travesty that the sequel that we got was a mobile game. but I think like
no, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. But the thing that I did love, and that's what you guys were talking about there, was the fact is you're playing about maybe 2 or 3 hours and you still don't see the xenomorph. It takes that long to get to that point, but that moment when you see it, from there, it just your heart's constantly pounding. But the thing I loved about the game the most was the design of it with the xenomorph itself, the AI is so sophisticated in the fact that if you try to do the same thing again, you'll die pretty quickly. The xenomorph learns your movements and can learn from it. That's scary.
Sounds like my
That's
college
good
professors.
to know.
Yeah. Oh,
That is very good to know.
Yeah, I'm trying to avoid any major spoilers for the game, especially because there's still quite early on in the game, so I will try and avoid as much as I can. But just strap yourself in. You're in for a wild ride, and especially like anyone who's a fan of the Alien series, it holds so much justice to it. We all know that there's been some very questionable Alien games in the past. Just going to cough, Colonial Marines. I did enjoy it to a certain extent. It's fun. It's a good, fun co-op game, but sitting on your own, not worth it. But Alien Isolation, it's the Resident Evil 7 of the Alien video game series. It's the thing that just brings it back to where it should have been in the first place. And like I said, it's still a complete travesty that we have not got a sequel to it or a proper follow-up.
well, speaking of sequels, how about Amnesia: The Dark Descent?
Yeah. That game was so much darker than I was expecting. I went into it. Cody's played it before, and he's played like the sequel as well. But I had never played it. I just knew it was kind of dark, 1800s-ish mystery sort of stuff. And so I was like, okay, this is definitely my thing. This is my realm. It got real wacko in the end. I'm just like, what is happening? Who are these creatures? What is going? It was intense. And those sack monster flesh guys,
Yeah.
every time I just couldn't do it. And the sounds they make, I don't know, it was an incredible game because especially like the sounds that you hear throughout the game, not necessarily having the monsters around you, but you hear them and you don't know where they are and you have to just run away, but you don't know if you're running towards them or away from them. I loved it. I'm still really confused though, because I feel like it left a lot of questions unanswered personally for me. So I'm a little bummed about that, but the game, it was good. Yeah.
Well, hopefully we get to find out some of those answers in the sequel, because that is happening, I believe, this week. This
Yep.
week. Wow. What other games have we got on the horizon, people? I know there's so many other horror games that are just jumping out to me. I know we haven't talked about Silent Hill. That's because I haven't played it yet, but I'll definitely pay the respect to where it's due, because I hear a lot of people talking about that one.
There's an old game I'd love to touch on called Eternal Darkness that was on the GameCube. Have any of you guys played that? There was a system.
I did play a little bit of it,
Yeah.
but it was that game that sort of it messed with my head so much that I never went back to it.
Absolutely, in a way that no other game I've seen. I haven't seen any other game mess with your head in the way that Eternal Darkness does. And I'll explain the game mechanic. Basically, you've got a sanity meter, and if this goes up too high, then things start to happen within the game. But it's not just within the game. It kind of breaks the fourth wall. For example, have you ever seen like when an old style TV, when you turn it off, it kind of like flickers down to a little white dot and then turns off? It will do that within the game. It will come up with mute on the corner of your screen as if your TV's just been muted. There's times when the volume kind of drops. There's a sequence where it actually pretends to delete all your save games. And every time this happens, it then clicks back to where you were in the game. And then your character just screams something like, I can't believe this is happening. And it's so weird. Like the first time I played it, I didn't know about these things. And there was one time it just crashed back to the loading screen of the GameCube. And I'm like, you think your game's crashed? And then all of a sudden you're continuing on with the game. And it messes with your head big time.
Breaking the fourth wall. Oh my gosh.
There's about 40 of these different sequences. If you look it up on YouTube, you can find a video with a compilation of them all put together. But that was something completely different. And I loved that. Again, it's another game that I think we deserved a sequel to, but never got. I think there was actually lawsuits around who owned Eternal Darkness and all sorts of shenanigans like that. So we never got to see a sequel. That was great.
How about Until Dawn? That's a game I have recently finished. I know Megan, mega fan of that. Wayne as well. Ken, have you played that also?
Unfortunately, I haven't. I've only recently been converted to PlayStation. Well, I haven't been fully converted, but I've only recently got a PlayStation. So it is in my backlog to actually play. Which I've seen the reviews and everything, and I've seen bits of gameplay, and to me it does look like a phenomenal like horror game, like putting you into the the view of the characters. I played a little bit of the VR game, and it is terrifying.
Yeah, that's 80s slasher horror video game goodness at its finest. Yeah. I mean, thoughts on that, because that game has left me scarred. I think I don't think I've got any sleep this week because of it.
A brief point about Until Dawn. We all talked about how horror movies kind of got us into horror video games. Until Dawn is the perfect transition. If you know someone who likes horror movies but doesn't play video games, this is the game, because it is so cinematic. They've got what do you call the guy that acts in Mr. Robot?
Rami Malek.
He's one of the main characters.
Oh, he's Josh. Yeah, that's right. I did not know that the entire game, and I was looking at the behind the scenes thing, like, what the heck? This is the guy from the Queen documentary. What? Like, how is this possible?
It's one of those games a bit like if you remember Uncharted 2, they used to promote Uncharted 2 almost in a way that, if your boyfriend was sitting playing boyfriend or girlfriend was sitting playing Uncharted 2, you could watch it almost like a movie because it's that cinematic. I think Until Dawn fits in the same box. It would just be as much fun watching someone play it as it would be to play it yourself.
For you, what were your favorite characters and moments out of that for you, Megan and Wayne? Because I know that there's so many split feelings out there between, who you obviously wanted to die, who you wanted to live, who you tried to save, who didn't make it, and just what you were left with in the end, if anything.
Yeah, so I just want to touch on Wayne saying it's a perfect transition. That's exactly what got me into video gaming. Like I said earlier, it was the perfect transition for me. Cody knew that I loved horror. He knew that I would love this game. And I was still adamant about, no, nothing's better than Mario. Just leave it alone. 90s games, whatever. And then he introduced me to this, and my mind was blown. And I haven't looked back. It's that good. It is still my all-time favorite video game ever. And so touching on favorite characters and who I want to save and die. So I don't want to give you any spoilers. So have you lost anybody yet? Like, how far into the game are you?
I've finished it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I guess for those listening at home, feel free to just skip over the next 2 or 3 minutes or so. Hit that fast forward button real quick, because we're going to go into this a little bit deeper for those that have played Until Dawn. But yeah, I mean, as far as characters, ones that made it out early, ones that made it out alive in the end, who you got?
Yeah. So I always, every time, I've played it multiple times now, Sam is my favorite. She's incredible. And there at the end, every time I lose her, I try so hard. I get so angry because she's the controller. You have to sit still, so still.
I can't do
save
that.
her. And I think I do it every time. And then it's like she dies, and I almost like throw my controller every time because I'm like, how did I mess up again? She's my favorite. And I have to try every time to keep her. But least favorite characters? Jessica. I don't like Jessica.
Oh, okay.
Because she's the blonde, right? With the I don't like her. And then who's Emily? She's mean too. They're just like so angry and rude, and I'm just like, okay, if I lose you guys, is fine, whatever.
Honestly, I was in the same boat. I tried, like, Emily just annoyed the crap out of me because she was always so mean to Matt, and she was, I think, kind of cheating over there with Mike, and I was like, you know what, like, if she goes, I'm fine with it. If somebody's got to die in this game, it's Emily. Be gone.
Yeah. I also, the first time I played, I kept him alive, but then the next time I played, he died. What's his name? The shy, kind of geeky one who's in love with the
Matt, I think.
No, it's Josh's best friend.
Oh, Chris.
Chris, yes.
Yes.
Chris. I don't know if you lost him at all, but the first time I played through, he was totally fine. And then the next time I played through, I all of a sudden lost him. And I was like, what just happened? How did that happen? He literally had his head cut off.
That's the one I got. I was like, what is this? I tried so hard to save Chris the whole time, and this is what I get. Like, the butterfly effect came back full circle on me.
Yeah,
Wayne, who did you have in that?
It might have been 2 or 3 years ago I played this, so I don't remember specific characters. I remember the main guy with the actor that I mentioned. I just remember, I can't remember the name, but there was one girl in it who was just an absolute, and whenever she died, it was like, yeah, that's fine. I think I made it out of the game. I think I made it out of the game with like 2 people alive. Almost everyone died for me. Big moments in the game for me was, I played the game. This is a bit of a spoiler, but I won't out and out spoil it.
Fire away.
I thought it was a straight up slasher movie. I didn't think there was going to be any sort of supernatural element to it. So as I played the game and certain things were revealed towards the end of the movie, that was just like a holy what, and I love that. I love that element of it. The fact that, it's the threat, so to speak, wasn't on the front of the box. It wasn't in the trailers. It was left as a surprise towards the end of the game. And I won't ruin what that surprise is, because I thought it was brilliant. Absolutely outstanding the way it was delivered.
Oh, yeah.
There's so many times too in Until Dawn where you get that false sense of security, of hope, where, like maybe the fire guy, I think of him, where you think you're cool for a minute, old man grandpa shows up to save the day. Hey, personally, I'm comfortable when an old man shows up to the scene because he probably knows what's up. He's got old man strength. He can fight off anything. And, obviously we know how that played out, but I know we probably got about 10 or 15 minutes or so here, so we can kind of segue into the next area of this, but does anybody have any favorite moments they can recall or paint a picture of from horror games of the past, present, and future? I guess the future doesn't count. That's my fault. But
there's one incident I got to tell you guys about. There was an Alien versus Predator game released way back. I think it was 1999. The game came with 3 packages. Basically, you could play as a Marine, you could play as an alien, or you could play as the Predator. So I got this game. It was on PC, loaded it up, and thought I'll have a go at the Marine, because that's probably the least exciting one. So we'll start there and let it build. And it starts off, and if you've seen Aliens, you'll remember the motion tracker within the game. So you've got this motion tracker, and you're walking down all these corridors, and it's given that click, 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 and you see the little spot on the motion tracker. And it's starting to get faster and faster and faster. As that click's going faster, my heart rate's going faster. And it gets to the point where this little dot is right in front of me. And the clicker's going click, 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 click. And I'm sitting going, what is going on? There's no alien here. And I took another step forward, and the thing dropped from the ceiling in front of me.
No.
And I do not joke about this. My mouse went about 3 foot up into the air. I jumped out of my chair and I ran downstairs. And my mum was standing there doing the ironing, and she's like, "What's wrong?" I was like, I was just playing a video game that spooked me. I'm okay. And I walked back up the stairs. I closed the game. I uninstalled it, and I have never played it since. And that was 20 years ago.
Some harsh feelings.
That was, if someone says, what is the scariest game you ever played? It's got to be AVP 1999. And it's because of that motion tracker.
AVP
Horrifying.
1999.
I think one of the things about it was, back then, video games weren't as vertical as they are now. So you don't expect to be looking up and down. Like, I grew up on Wolfenstein 3D, and you literally could not look up and down. I think the original Doom was the same. So you're not thinking about enemies being up there or down there. Everything's meant to be straight ahead of you. So when that enemy dropped down, oh my God. Nearly killed me.
I'm glad you're still with us, Wayne. What about you, Ken? Any heart racing moments you can recall from years of old?
I've probably talked it. Well, I've already said a few there, just obviously with the dogs in Resident Evil in the first one, but something even more on some of the newer games. I'm quite a big fan of Dead by Daylight and the Friday the 13th game. And the thing that always gets my heart racing, even though I know exactly what's happening, is when you start hearing the music.
Every time.
When you start hearing that music and you can't see where the killer is, that freaks me out every single time, especially in the Friday the 13th, because your screen gets that sort of fuzziness first, and you're like, oh, you get that quick jump and you hear the music and you're like, where is he? And you're sitting looking everywhere, you're panicking, you just start running, and just gets the heart racing every single time.
There's a big element of unpredictability to that as well, because those are multiplayer games, and whoever ends up getting that pick for the villain in that round can be, depending how smart they are, absolutely terrifying.
I've played those games a bit with Ken and a few friends, and I always, to me, like a true horror experience is on your own with the lights out and the curtains drawn and just playing games. So I went into this thinking, a multiplayer game that you're playing with your mates, that can't be scary. That's not a scary environment. And then you play them. And as you say, Ken, it's the way they ramp the tension up with the music. It's so well done. It's incredibly well done.
Yeah. 100%, and that's what I was sort of alluding to earlier on, in the fact that with horror movies we've seen they've gone from being very scary to not so scary, but with video games it's ramped up, and it's the little things like that I find just make these games just so much more scarier. It's that tension building, and I think Friday the 13th and Dead by Daylight have just nailed it.
I can't help but think that the movie industry maybe caps their horror level, in that if we make this too scary, then we're going to bring our audience down. Certain people won't want to see it. Whereas the video game industry is like, go for it. Make this as
ruin their
horrifying
lives
as you possibly can, because as gamers, we're suckers for it. We want that adrenaline-filled horror experience.
Yeah, we're definitely junkies. You're not wrong about that. But, Megan, any heart racing moments you can recall from your time in the horror games?
Yeah, actually, so Amnesia, the sea creature, every time you're in the water, hearing it like splash behind you, but the lead up to it, when it's there, it's around, you just don't know where, and that as soon as you like accomplish this one thing or find this one thing, then it's gonna come out, but you don't know where from. That completely terrified me, because then you're trying to run through the water, but then if you run, you're louder, and so it will find you, and then you hear it behind you, and just that sea monster creature. Whoo,
it's different every time, right?
Yeah, it was for me, at least. I don't know about everybody else, but it in different places, and
water. Ugh.
Yeah.
I'll say for me, one of the more recent ones that stood out for me, and I'll list off a couple of them here just really quick, but one for me was definitely in Resident Evil 7. Obviously, you're going and you're trying to find your girlfriend. Mia is the objective of the game, and she's been missing for about 3 years after visiting this farm in the middle of nowhere, I think Louisiana. So, you're the boyfriend, you're going through this pretty much terrifying looking house, and you find this old found footage tape, and the game puts you in that tape for a second, and you just play through the person that's in the tape, which is Mia, his girlfriend. And she's in this swamp area. She's lost. She's going through this weird outhouse looking thing in the bayou or whatever it's called. Sorry, my southern familiarity there is not as good as I'd like it to be. But anyway, she's in this house, and you get introduced to this character called Aunt Marguerite. And if you don't know who Aunt Marguerite is, Aunt Marguerite, she's absolutely terrifying. And she's this old lady in the game in Resident Evil 7 that basically is there to ruin your entire life. You go through this entire swamp area, hiding from her, trying to make it out. You're this girl in distress. You're trying to get out of there. And you make it through this 20, 30-minute sequence after all these close calls with her being pretty much right in her face. She's walking around with the lantern the whole time. And you get into this little tunnel under the house, and you're crawling away, and you're like, whew, all right. And then the lights go out for a second. And then it's pitch black, and out of nowhere, it's just her face, like as close as it is right now to the screen. just her nose and her eyes are pretty much all you can see. She's like, "Where do you think you're going?" And then just you see the camera fall down. It pans on you, and you're being dragged away in the tunnel by this crazy old lady, and that's the last thing you see, and it cuts off. And I don't know if you guys remember that, but that to me was absolute trauma. I still don't trust old people to this day for that game. I've always felt that way. I think Paranormal Activity 2 is what did that as well. 2 or 3, where, you know, you've got the older ladies in the movie that are out in that garage or whatever, and then you come into the house and one's levitating. That to me, like, you know what, my trust for old people and horror is gone. I just avoid them at all costs. That's all I think.
Funny thing with the Resident Evil 7, as I said, I've only recently got myself a PlayStation 4, and one of the big ticks that I had to do was play Resident Evil 7 in VR. Now I've played Resident Evil 7 to death on the Xbox. I know every jump scare, I know every moment that's coming, but VR, oh my word! Like every single jump scare, you know that's coming, just makes it worse because you know it's going to be right up in your face. It is terrifying. If you've never played it in VR, I highly recommend it. It is a phenomenal VR game.
I have it sitting on the shelf there for VR, and I just can't bring myself to play it. I've played one horror game in VR, and to be honest, it wasn't great. It was The Outpatient, I believe it was called. Actually set in the same universe as Until Dawn. It wasn't very good, but when it was scary, just no. Horror in VR is a different beast. It really is.
All right. So Megan's hopping off for a little bit, ladies and gentlemen. Megan, tell everybody where they can find you online.
Yeah, so you can find Cody and I on our co-op gaming channel at Emerald Moon Adventures on YouTube. You can also find us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook at the same handle, Emerald Moon Adventures.
Excellent. All right. Thanks, Megan. And we're definitely going to have you guys back on sometime soon, but you heard her. Go check her out. That's going to be on Emerald Moon Adventures. Find them on YouTube. Find them on Facebook. They're all over the place. You're going to love what they do.
Bye.
All right. Bye, Megan. All right. So we've lost Megan. She'll be back on shortly here at another date to be continued, but it was great having her on there for a little bit as well to talk about horror games. Continuing the conversation here, were there any other heart-pounding moments that we can recall from days of old, whether that be in gaming or movies or anything else for that matter?
I think I've covered the spookiest and the creepiest ones that I can think of.
Obviously not video game, but even just in a horror movie sense, probably one of the freakiest things for me was the remake of House on Haunted Hill. Ooh. There's a scene where there's a scene where there's like a carousel going around, and with the carousel, when you look into it, you know, you can see a moving image, and there's a moment where it's the sort of Vincent Price character is starting to, like, you know, move, takes off the head and drops and starts like moving it around, and that moment freaked me out watching that movie, and it still sticks in the back of my head to this day. But even, like, you know, with a lot of horror movies, like there's some, you know, massively iconic scenes. You think of like Friday the 13th, you know, the Kevin Bacon death with the, you know, the arrow coming out of the throat. And Psycho, you have, you know, that you've got the shower scene. Not so great in the Vince Vaughn one, but
yeah, I can see that being terrifying.
Talking about video games, talking about horror movies, but still leaning into the video game. There was a movie of Silent Hill. Well, there was actually two, but I'm only going to talk about the first one. There was something they'd done in that which I thought was just really, really, really smart. They got that, you know, the nurses from Silent Hill with that weird janky movement. Obviously, to a degree, easy enough to animate. But I thought they got that so well in the movies. You know, it was almost as if it was just lifted from the video games. I think that movie is one of the very few video game movies that does justice to the source material. I really, really enjoyed the first Silent Hill movie. I haven't seen the second one because I've been told it's garbage. But I really like the first one. And I think a lot of the aesthetics in that, really, really creepy, really, really unsettling. Thought it was definitely a good one.
There's a lot of other horror games we haven't mentioned, and I'm sure we'll talk about that either during next year's Halloween podcast or future episodes we've got coming up. But one I did want to give a shout out to was Outlast, and that entire series to me is absolutely traumatic as well. Found, or maybe not found footage, but going through with your recorder, the flashlight, everything else like that. There's a ton of sequences in that game that I found scary. The cornfield chase I can think of from 2, the sewer chase. The first 5 minutes of the game when you crawl into the asylum and voila, look what's in there. That game to me nailed it.
That's all I played. I only played about the first maybe 45 minutes of that. And I loved the look of it and the feel of it, the tension, the music, all the effects. Everything was giving me, this is my kind of game vibes. But then you get to that first part. I think you need to find 3 batteries. And you're in an area where there's 3 creepy monsters kind of scoping you out. You've no HUD in the game. And I really struggled to progress through the game because whenever I was hiding, I had no way of knowing, is it safe to come out? Is it not safe to come out? And although maybe that plays into the horror aspect of it, the not knowing, I just couldn't get the grips with it. I got nowhere in that game. I just had to end up quitting on it.
Any games? Sorry, go ahead, Ken.
I was going to say that first jump scare in the first sort of 10, 20 minutes when you go into the room and it's all dark and next minute you just see this body hanging, gets me every single time.
Same.
Every time.
Came out of left field completely.
Yeah.
Any games out there that maybe it wasn't intended to be a horror game or a suspense game in any way, shape, or form, but you still found it a little bit terrifying in some way, shape, or form? I'll say for me, there's a couple. I'd say one, the first Halo 1. When you think of horror or something scary, you definitely don't think of the Halo games, right? Probably the last thing that comes to mind. But I can say as a child, going through and playing on the original Xbox for the first time, you're playing through the campaign and you get to it's the chapter where you discover the flood.
The library, isn't it?
The library, yep. And, it paints this up so well, and it's a good layup into discovering it because the whole time it's just tension. You're on this weird alien planet. You go all the way down to the depths of this huge laboratory area, and you're finding dead bodies along the way, and, you're finding this found footage again from those Marines. And things just keep happening, and it eventually, bursts with. I wouldn't call them zombies, obviously, but the flood have taken over the corpses and reanimated these Marines and everything else. And those running at you for the first time, to me, I found absolutely terrifying. It wasn't intended to be horror, I don't think, on Bungie's part at the time, but it definitely did its job and scared the crap out of me.
I think a good one for me was within the Arkham Asylum game. There was obviously not supposed to be a horror game per se, but I mean the build up to this moment was 100% intentional to be scary, and it was the build up to the first encounter of the Scarecrow, where you're down in the morgue and you're walking along, and it's that same mechanic that was sort of used in Eternal Darkness, where and stuff like Evil Within, where the game starts messing with your mind a little bit. And I remember the first time I got to this moment, I got the game on release day, sitting on my 360, just edging the go, started playing in the afternoon, and by the point I got to this, it was sort of at nighttime, everything was dark. I've been playing for quite a while, so a bit of fatigue was going on, and I actually thought I was going legit crazy. That moment where you open up the body bags and you see your parents there, and you're like, oh, and then you open up and Scarecrow pops out. Freaked me out. I dropped the controller, turned the TV off, and went, I have to go to bed.
I'm legit getting shivers up my spine when you talking about that part of that game. It's so memorable, so brilliantly done. And I think one of the reasons it works so well as well is that whenever I'm playing Layers of Fear, I'm waiting for all these things to happen. I'm waiting for the jump scares. I'm waiting for the manipulation of space to kind of screw in my head. But I didn't see that coming in Batman because it's a Batman game, and although, it's got Scarecrow and you should expect something to do with fear, it didn't tease Scarecrow leading into that. It just came out of nowhere, and it was brilliant. One of the best moments of the whole Arkham series, if you ask me.
I think as well, like another moment within the Arkham series that got me big style was the introduction of Man-Bat in Arkham Knight.
You mentioned this recently, and I completely forgot about it. I had to go look
Yeah.
it up on YouTube, and then it was like, oh yeah.
Is that the one where you're swinging around, just pretty much random buildings at that point, and you come up on the curve of one with a zip line, and right there at the very top of it is voila, Man-Bat.
Yeah, just pops out. It's a fantastically done jump scare. I'm not a fan of these, these sort of just like straight in your face, like boo, like to try and get you the jump. But this was perfectly done. And it sort of added that layer to the game where you're like, right, anything can happen now. So what's going to happen next?
It's the fact that it's triggered off the back of something that you've done 1,000 times up to that stage. How many times did you zip up to a roof? You've done it over and over and over again.
That's the equivalent of hijacking a car in GTA. Like in Batman, you're doing that all the time.
So it's there's no reason to expect anything, and then bam, there it is, right in your face. One of the scary moments, I would say, and this isn't a specific game, this is gaming in general, is any RPG where you go into an area where you haven't leveled up enough to get into. For example,
that is terrifying.
Fallout. I remember going into an area with a load of fire ants in Fallout 3. And it was I just got swarmed by them, and I knew that I couldn't take these guys on. They destroyed me. But worse again than that was the first time coming across the Death Claws in Fallout 3, just because I wasn't even aware there was going to be enemies like this. I drifted a wee bit too north, and Fallout doesn't warn you like some other RPGs do. Fallout, some games might be, hold on a minute, you're only level 12. This is a level 20 area. Calm yourself. Fallout just lets you go for it, and before you know it, you're in a cave surrounded by Death Claws that are just absolutely going to tank you, and that's always a scary moment.
Another moment for me, I think, would have to be in Dying Light. That game, being chased by the volatiles at night, especially for the first time. Even playing that game, like I'm probably about 200 hours in that game on Steam. And still, every time I fire that up and there's a volatile nearby, I'm out. That's it. That to me is absolutely terrifying. Whether it's in a really enclosed area and you're trying to parkour across a city, or, let's say you're in a car and you're in that DLC. I think it's called The Following for Dying Light. If you're going out there in the farmlands and you're just running through on your ATV or vehicle and you think you're safe, these things come along. They can outrun you. They can jump on there. They can rip you out. There, no sense of security around these things. There's nothing they can, be stopped by.
Yeah, I haven't played that yet. It's one of those ones that I will get around to eventually, especially with the co-op. Big fan of co-op games, so I think we will pick that up at some stage.
One day. Did anybody play Red Dead Redemption Undead Nightmare back in the day when Rockstar still did single-player DLC?
I played it, but it was a glitchy mess when I played it. And there was a feature in that game that really, really bugged me. You could go through these different towns and kind of clean them out of zombies, and then they were marked as clean. But then you go to the next town, and the previous one would get reinfected.
Yep.
And it just felt like an endless loop of... I think maybe that's the point, that you're fighting against a virus that can't be defeated. Why does that sound familiar?
Hey, COVID, we're looking at you. Die already.
But that really kind of bugged me. I've just realized how dark it's getting here. Spooky. So I didn't overly get involved in Red Dead Redemption. I also found, like, after coming off the back of the game itself and then playing like a sort of fantastical horror supernatural game in this same universe, the tone just felt off to me. I know that sometimes that's the point of DLCs, that you can do something a bit wacky or a bit more zany within a world you've already been in, but it felt silly to me after such a serious game as Red Dead Redemption.
Any games where you guys feel like, maybe it's not necessarily a horror game, but any game for that matter that might benefit from, whether it be Halloween or horror-based DLC or just having a horror element to it? I'll say mine, Grand Theft Auto 5, and this is just the most generic thing you could ever ask for, but I've been begging for zombies since the beginning. Rockstar, if you're out there, please hear my cries. You did such a good job on the zombie DLC for Undead Nightmare. I would love to see that in there. I'd also love to see, and again, this might be a crossover implementation that's completely impossible, or just, this is way out there, but Call of Duty, Modern Warfare, the one that has just come out here this year. Warzone, you've got 150 players that fight down to the last circle. I would love for this October to see maybe some zombies in there some way, shape, or form. If I was going about, it's already terrifying enough in that game, the suspense of hearing people's footsteps above you, thinking it's an enemy, a team, people parachuting in, stuff like that. But if you added zombies to that, to me, it may not be a super serious thing, but that would be enough to put me over the edge of probably having a heart attack.
I think the games that you're saying, games that would benefit from having a horror style sequel. To me, it's games that already have an element of horror in them, but just never necessarily, stretch that out into a full game. And BioShock has to get a mention there. I think a full scale horror style BioShock would be utterly terrifying.
Big Daddy Pumpkinhead.
Hell yeah. I would be all over that. Especially, I mean, as I say, there's scary bits in that, but the Big Daddy could be used in a way similar to how Mr. X or Nemesis is used in the Resident Evil games.
X gonna give it to you.
Where it's not a head-on battle, it's more of a, this is a threat that I need to avoid rather than fight, at least for the, a certain aspect of it anyway.
I never thought about that, a BioShock horror game. What about you, Ken?
I think... Honestly, I'm not too sure, on a lot of games that would probably benefit. I do agree with Wayne where you do have that sort of slight element of horror. I think it does work better. But one that I want to mention that I found very enjoyable, it wasn't necessarily a Halloween download, it was more just an expansion, but had a horror element, was in Rise of the Tomb Raider. It was the Baba Yaga. Which, for anyone that knows the history of Baba Yaga, it's a Slovakian sort of old tale, sort of almost like a witch type character, and there was an expansion brought onto that, and it was one of those things where it wasn't straight up scary, it just messed with your head and made you see things that you didn't think you were seeing, and it played with your head, and it brought that sort of element of horror to the game. But then with Tomb Raider, there is always sort of that wee element sort of sitting in the back of, like being chased by something or going into a cave and being, seeing a bear and like panicking. I mean, I still remember from like the first ever Tomb Raider, the first T-Rex encounter, like that scared me. Now, granted, it was a lot younger, but that scared the hell out of me. But I do think, I do agree with Wayne. There's any of those games that have that slight hint of horror to begin with, you can definitely throw in a lot in there.
Would you throw Elder Scrolls or Fallout into that mix? And I know that's kind of a reach there, but I think of like the feral ghouls you'd find in like the underground in Fallout. To me, I don't know if anybody else found that terrifying, but spiders also in Skyrim. Was not a mega fan of those either.
There's definitely creepy elements in those games, but I can't help but think that Elder Scrolls and Fallout, if they just leaned too far into the horror, they wouldn't be able to do a lot of the other stuff that makes those games so good. I think they work with a little, here's a side quest that's got a bit of a spooky theme to it, but I wouldn't personally want a full-blown horror Skyrim or Fallout.
Do we have an open world horror game? Like, does that exist on that scale?
I think that kind of goes against, if you think of all the elements that make a horror game scary, those enclosed corridors, being trapped, that sort of thing. It kind of goes against the idea of open world. I'm sure there probably is one or two that I can't think of, but
there is one that I haven't played a lot of, but I do know a couple of people have, and it's called The Forest.
Oh yes, okay.
Yeah, so I mean, it's not a traditional horror game, but it does have that element of sort of throwing you out in the wilderness all on your own and fighting off an enemy that is terrifying. Like there, I do agree as well. I don't think, to me, a horror game is closed spaces, limited ammo. Sort of putting you on those moments of having to really think with your head. I think when you bring that open world element to it, you're almost taking away the horror because you can just run away a lot easier.
I've got a pitch for you. Think of this for a video game, okay? It's all the 80s horror legends, okay? So you've got Jason, you've got Michael Myers, Freddy Krueger, Pinhead, the scary ghost dude from Scream, all of those, right? But here's the twist: they're all Lego.
Oh,
come on, who wouldn't play that? Lego horror, you know. And the scariest moment is the bit where you stand on a Lego, you know.
The cheese factor is upon us. Well, gentlemen, any last words here before we take it home and wrap this up?
No, I think we're good. I think we've covered a good amount of the horror video game world.
All right. Well, Wayne, why don't you start off? Why don't you tell us where we can find you?
Okay. My other podcast at the minute is on hiatus. But I did recently guest on a podcast called Cans Against the World. Cans Across the World. It's myself and a friend called Sean. It's basically where we just open a couple of beers and we have a chat about what's going on in the world. It's very casual, very laid back podcast. So I would say check that out. Cans Across the World.
How do you spell that first word? I'm sorry.
Cans, Cans. So it's probably the
Cans Across the World, ladies and gentlemen.
That's the one. That's us.
Sorry, just had to mediate the accent there sometimes.
Cons.
Cons. It sounded like something else for a minute. I was like, "There's no way we can find him there." But
say that was almost a Star Trek moment. Con.
Right. I was thinking like KHN or something, KHAN or something like that. All right, well, we'll go ahead and wrap it up then. So thanks for joining us, everybody, whether you were driving, flying, if you're at home, if you're at the gym, if you're on the moon, if you're at Taco Bell drive-thru. Thanks for joining us. We appreciate you taking the time to listen to us today. Don't miss an episode. It helps us to leave out a like, subscribe, and leave a review, too. That also helps us. We'd love to engage with our listeners, so feel free to send us an email, some feedback, or questions to gamesaverschannel@gmail.com. Sometimes we'll answer your questions live on the podcast in our final segment as well. We'll be doing that going forward. So if you want to do that, again, feel free to send us an email, question, feedback, anything like that to gamesaverschannel@gmail.com. With that as well, if you want to play with us, hey, we've got a Discord server coming up soon. Feel free to get on there. We'll send you our gamer tags so we could play some games. You can follow us on social media at facebook.com/GameSaversChannel, twitter.com/GameSaversTweet, and instagram.com/GameSaversChannel/. Find our website on gamesavers.podbean.com for all the other links and everything else you want to find related to this show. And as a friendly reminder, just because we're here pretty early on in the phases, I think we're on episode 3 right now. Best episode we've filmed to date out of all 3 whopping episodes that we have filmed. As a friendly reminder, you can listen to our show anywhere you listen to podcasts, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, TuneIn, plus Alexa on Amazon, Pandora, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Deezer, Overcast, Pocket Cast, Castro, and Castbox. We're all over the place. Find us anywhere you listen to podcasts. Thank you again for joining us today, and don't forget to save your game.